Hi students, today we're doing lesson 3.9, subtracting decimals. Today's lesson is very similar to the lesson we did yesterday with adding decimals, but today we're going to line them up and subtract. Remember, the key to today's lesson is just like yesterday, you must first line up your decimals. Okay, the important part of adding and subtracting is lining those decimals so that you can line up your place values. For the first problem here, Hannah has 3 36 hundredths kilograms of apples and 2 28 hundredths kilograms of oranges. Hannah estimates she has about 1 more kilogram of apples than oranges. How many more kilograms of apples than oranges does Hannah have? So we're going to go ahead and line up our decimals. And we're going to put 3 36 hundredths on top, 2 28 hundredths on the bottom. And then once we have our decimal points lined up, all of the other place values will also line up. So we can go ahead and then subtract. Now we're going to take 6 minus 8, which you cannot do. We're going to borrow from the 3 and make it a 2. The 6 becomes 16 because we add 10 to it. 16 minus 8 is 8. 2 minus 2 is 0. The decimal point, just like it did yesterday, comes straight down. And then 3 minus 2 equals 1. The answer is 1 800ths. Again, we are not going to estimate. We don't have to draw a quick picture. We're just going to focus more today on the actual subtracting of decimals. Remember, key is since subtraction and addition are inverse operations, meaning they're opposite of each other, you can check subtraction by adding the decimals up. So we're going to go ahead and subtract the next problem, which is 14 2/10 minus 8 63 hundredths. We've lined up the decimals. And just like we did with adding, when there is a place value that is missing a number, you can place a 0. So we're going to put a 0 in the hundredths place for 4 2/10 and make it 4 20 hundredths. Now we're going to go ahead and subtract, and 0 minus 3 you cannot do. So we borrow from the 2, make it a 1. The 0 becomes a 10. 10 minus 3 is 7. 1 minus 6, again, we cannot do, so we borrow from the 4, make it a 3. The 1 becomes an 11, so we have 11 minus 6, which is 5. The decimal point comes straight down, and we're left with 13 minus 8, which is 5. So our difference, or the answer to our subtraction problem, is 5 57 hundredths. We can take this answer, 5 57 hundredths, and add it to the number that we subtracted, 8 63 hundredths, and we can add those two together. So 7 plus 3 is 10, carry my 1. 6 plus 5 is 11, plus 1 is 12, carry the 1. 8 and 5 is 13, plus 1 more is 14. Decimal point comes straight down, and it gives us the number that we started with, which is 14 20 hundredths, or if we get rid of the 0, 14 2/10. So you can always check subtraction by adding the number that you subtracted and your difference, and it will always give you your original number that you started with. As we move down to the share and show, we're going to go through several of these problems here. We're, again, not going to estimate. 3 minus 8 you cannot do, so we borrow from the 8, make it a 7. The 3 becomes a 13. 13 minus 8 equals 5. 7 minus 1 is 6. The decimal point comes straight down. 5 minus 2 equals 3. Our answer is 3 65 hundredths. On to number 2. 5 minus 6. You cannot do, so we cross off the 4, make it a 3. The 5 becomes 15. 15 minus 6 equals 9. Then we move over to the 10th place. 3 minus 8 you cannot do as well. So we borrow from the 1s. The 4 becomes a 3. The 3 here becomes 13. 13 minus 8 equals 5. Decimal point comes straight down. 3 minus 1 equals 2. Now again, we can always check this by taking our 2 and 59 hundredths, which is our answer, and adding it to the 1 and 86 hundredths, which is what we subtracted. If I add those together, 9 and 6 gives me 15. Carry the 1. 8 and 5 is 13, plus 1 is 14. 2 plus 1 is 4. And we get our original number of 4 and 45 hundredths. So our answer, the difference to the subtraction problem, is 2 and 59 hundredths. Question number 3 has a 0 in the 10th place. So when we go through 4 and 3 hundredths minus 2 and 25 hundredths, when we go to borrow, we're going to have to borrow twice. So 3 minus 5 you cannot do. So we borrow from the 0. The 0 doesn't have anything to borrow from. So we borrow from the 4 and make it a 3. The 0 becomes a 10. But then we can borrow from the 10 and make it a 9. The 3 then becomes 13. So in that case, you had to borrow all the way across from the 1s, bring over 10, and then borrow from it in the 10th place. 13 minus 5 equals 8. 9 minus 2 is 7. Decimal point comes straight down. And 3 minus 2 equals 1, giving us a difference of 1 and 78 hundredths. Now go ahead and pause the video and then work on questions 4, 5, and 6, and then we'll reveal the answer. All right, so as you have solved those, you would have to add a 0 on number 5 as well as on number 6. You have to add zeros to those original numbers in the hundredths place, so that way you can borrow from them. The correct answers for each of these: for 70 hundredths minus 43 hundredths, you should get 27 hundredths. For number 5, 13 and 2/10, which we added the 0, minus 8 and 4 hundredths, you should get 5 and 16 hundredths. 15 and 8/10 on number 6, minus 9 and 67 hundredths. After you add a 0 and you borrow, you should get 6 and 13 hundredths. I'm going to go to the next page here. Now we're going to put these in word form and solve them. Number 7, 3 and 72 hundredths. 3 and 72 hundredths. We're going to subtract that from 5 and 81 hundredths. Now remember, we are subtracting that from, so the 5 and 81 hundredths is actually going to go first, and we're going to subtract 3 and 72 hundredths from that. So we're taking that away. The 5 and 81 hundredths is larger. It's going to go on the top. We then go ahead and subtract. 1 minus 2 you cannot do, so we borrow. The 1 becomes an 11. 11 minus 2 is 9. 7 minus 7 is 0. Bring our decimal down. 5 minus 3 is 2. And our answer is 2 and 9 hundredths. On number 8, again, we're going to read this carefully because it does say subtracted from. 1 and 6 hundredths subtracted from 8 and 32 hundredths. So 8 and 32 hundredths is going to go first because we're going to subtract 1 and 600ths away from that. So 1 and 600ths. Remember, 600ths is 1.06. The 6 has to be in the hundredths place. Then we're going to go ahead and subtract. 2 minus 6 in the hundredths place, you cannot do, so we borrow from the tenths. 2 becomes a 12 here. 12 minus 6 is 6. 2 minus 0 is 2. And in the ones place, 8 minus 1 is 7. And our answer is 7 and 2600ths. If we look down here to the algebra, this will not be on your homework, but it is good for you to kind of think and maybe think backwards to normal subtraction and maybe using addition to check things. So question number 9 is already set up. The number that's missing is actually the answer. So we're just going to set this problem up as 5 and 2800ths minus 3 and 4/10ths. Again, focusing on lining up our decimal. We're going to add a 0 in the hundredths place, and then we can go ahead and subtract. 8 minus 0 is 8. 2 minus 4 we cannot do, so we borrow from the 5, make this a 4. The 2 becomes 12. 12 minus 4 is 8. 4 minus 3 is 1, and the decimal point comes straight down. The missing number is 1 and 8800ths, which was the answer or the difference to that problem. On number 10, now we're missing the first number in a subtraction problem. Remember, the first number in the subtraction problem is always the largest number, because we start with a large number, we take some away, and then we have a little bit left. So in order to work this backwards, we're actually going to add our answer, the difference, plus the number that we subtracted away from the original number. So we're going to add 6 and 4700ths plus 4 and 3200ths. 7 plus 2 is 9. 4 plus 3 is 7. And 6 plus 4 is 10. So the original number was 10 and 7900ths. Now we can check that by taking 10 and 7900ths minus 6 and 4700ths and see if we get the 4 and 3200ths. 9 minus 7 is 2. 7 minus 4 is 3. And then 10 minus 6 is 4. And we indeed get the difference of 4 and 3200ths. So the missing number here was 10 and 7900ths. On number 11, we are missing the number that we subtract from 11 and 5700ths to get our difference of 7 and 5100ths. If we're missing the number that we can subtract, we're actually going to do another subtraction problem, but we're going to subtract the 11 and 5700ths minus the 7 and 5100ths. So 11 and 5700ths minus 7 and 5100ths. We make sure that we line up our decimals, and we have 7 minus 1 is 6. 5 minus 5 is 0. Bring our decimal down. 11 minus 7 is 4. And the number that we subtracted away from was 4 and 600ths. Now again, we can check this by going back to the original and plugging 4 and 600ths in for n. 11 and 5700ths minus 4 and 600ths. 7 minus 6 is 1. 5 minus 0 is 5. And 11 minus 4 is 7, which is the answer that we were looking for. So the missing number in this case was 4 and 600ths. Now, you won't have any of those algebra questions on your homework tonight, but it is good to kind of think, if you're missing a number, how could you rework the problem in order to solve? Go ahead and turn to your homework and complete those problems that are assigned for tonight's homework. If you have questions, you can message Mrs. Loddick or I. Great work today. Have a great day.